yearning just to be with you. I'm learning that you are my one desire. I'm learning that you are the one who's setting my heart on fire. Teach me more about you. Teach me not to doubt you like I used to do. Learning that I love you. Learning that you love me too.
So, we just heard music from September 11th, 1934, the second Goodman record date. However, it wasn't issued under Goodman's name. It was issued under two different pseudonyms, Vincent Rose and his orchestra and the Modernists. And just to get the discographical stuff out of the way, Nick and Hal and I are approaching this from talking 90% about the music and the arrangements and things like that, the history, the dates, discography, all of which are equally important. We leave to some other folks who can address that equally. That's not the focus of this. We'll pay some attention to it. We might even make some errors along the way, but hopefully we won't make any errors about the music, and that's just opinion anyway. To start with, the big news is that Hank Whalen, who we heard on the first session, and you guys could tell that it was an aluminum bass from the way the notes were popping out, has been replaced here by Harry Goodman. And I'd love to get your take on this because sometimes I feel like it's poor Harry Goodman because, his place was taken by Artie Bernstein, who was, head and shoulders above the great majority of bass players at the time, just in terms of technique and precision. And so it's always that, well, Harry Goodman was good, but then a great bass player came in. But in many ways, Harry Goodman himself was a great bass player, having made the transition from tuba to the bass, probably not that long before these records were made, sometime between 1930 and 1934. So since you both are rhythm section players and superlative ones, I'm wondering if we could just address that first. Hal?
I would love to. Harry Goodman had a great recorded legacy with Ben Pollack, where he played very excellent Chicago-style tuba with a lot of shuffle beat to it, like the other tuba players, Jim Lanigan and John Kuhn. Harry Goodman was just as good as any of those guys. And when he made the switch to string bass, I noticed he made a recording with Wingy Manone before this session with the Modernists, and he was really pulling the rhythm section along, very New Orleans style, and had a wonderful beat and a big sound, and it's a wooden instrument, not aluminum, as far as I can tell. It also sounds to me like they possibly moved the bass forward closer to the microphone on this session than where Hank Whalen was on the previous session.
What I'm just curious, when you say a shuffle beat on the tuba, what is that?
Kind of an oscillating sound, not a root and fifth, and not walking like a string bass, not 4-beat like Country Washburn, just kind of oscillating is the only way I can describe it. Not as much as Jim Lanigan did with Mackenzie and Condon, but more busier in the rhythm section than just the first and third beats.
I mean, would it be fair to ask you to imitate it, or just to get an idea of what it sounds like? Because I'm not sure by oscillating exactly what that sounds like. Gotcha. Active between 2 and 4, a lot of fill-ins, and not in a predictable pattern.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Nick.
Yeah, I think Harry's a step forward as far as overall sound. It's definitely an improvement on the last session. As Hal said, he's got a great beat. The first thing I thought about when I was listening to him was how big his beat was. It's nice and full. You know where he is at all times, and he plays really well with Van Epps. They've got a great feel together. You can't imagine that they played too much together before this, although they may have. But they kind of fall right in with one another. They lay down the rhythm throughout the entire side, and they even get into some really kind of interesting, under the Goodman solo chorus, for example, like they get into a really nice groove that pre-shadows really the sound that Benny became known for within a few years. Welcome Harry Goodman. It's great to hear him.
I love how Benny, who only has those 8 measures there, but nonetheless, he comes in, really stamps it, with that Goodman feeling. It's so interesting. Just one quick question before we delve into Van Epps and stuff. In the vernacular of that kind of dance band arrangement, and by the way, I have to say, it's a beautiful chart. I love the sound of the saxophones and that little da 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 da. It's almost that figure comes back all throughout the arrangement. Clearly, whoever wrote this, was somebody who really knew about composition and stuff. But that beginning with the 3/4 measure, the 3/4 measure, and the 2 beat, which of course is 8 beats. But I'm just imagining, it'd make a great scene in a Laurel Hardy short or something. All right, it's a waltz, my dear. They do 2 measures and 3/4. Then there's the 2/4 measures, and everybody falls down on the dance floor like in a Charlie Chaplin film or something like that. Is that something that you encounter playing stocks from that era or stuff like that? I mean, or is that very unusual? It seems unusual to me to be so pronounced.
I don't think it's that unusual. I played a stock arrangement recently that had a hesitation in it, very similar to that, and it was One More Time, the number that Bing Crosby recorded, and it has that same kind of thing in it, and that's I guess very early 1930s. So I don't think that was that uncommon.
Yeah. I just remember at the end of some weddings I used to play, occasionally, we'd start with the waltz, and then when it got to be 4 o'clock and it was time for them to leave, without doing anything, we would just go into 4/4. And you'd see this collision on the dance floor and stuff like this, and people just kind of walk off, They didn't know exactly what had happened, except something had happened, what I mean?
Well, that can be a collision on the bandstand as well. I mean, there's a certain amount of precision it takes to pull off those changes like that and really keep the feel. And that's one of the things I love about the record, is that in spite of these interesting changes, these gear shifting and kind of time signatures changes, the beat's great throughout. It's got a good steady pulse. They keep great time. They pull it off really well without sounding like they're working too hard.
Well, it's true.
Van Epps was doing that too. Van Epps was the main timekeeper, to my ears, on that recording.
I agree.
Well, let's get into that, because I guess what I want to underline, one of the things I'd like to underline here, is how much musical information are on these recordings that is of use to musicians, regardless of what genre or idiom of music you play, even outside of jazz. It's just superlative musicianship, and it just happens to be here in the mode of a dance bandish chart. And as we talked about in the first episode, got to erase any association with the word dance band or dance bandish with a pejorative meaning. It's not at all how it's used in this context. It's a genre. It's not a jazz arrangement. It's more of a hotelish arrangement. It's a beautiful arrangement. So let's dig into George Van Epps a little bit. And let's start with Nick. And, what do you hear? What do you know?
Well, I'm hearing a few things that are very kind of typical Van Epps, or at least what I think a lot of us associate with George. Great timekeeping abilities. I may have mentioned this before. One of the things that George espoused through his technique books was a real evenness in terms of the time you're giving to each note. So regardless of time signature, and even to some extent, regardless of accentuation and syncopation, you're being really straightforward with the beat. And that sounds somewhat contradictory, but as a guitar player, when you're conceptualizing it, it helps you to think about how George thought about it, or talked about it, at least, about really giving each note its proper time. It's one thing to say about Van Epps that we should get out of the way. He was an exact perfectionist. He was someone that really worked towards this kind of exactitude. The family the family hobby was making watches, and so he comes from this line of very precise, very detail driven individuals, and I think you hear that in his playing, and certainly his approach to playing. It's nice and even, so you have that, and you certainly hear that here. You can also start to hear his kind of choral conception a little more clearly on this side, where he's pared down his voicings down to 3 notes, probably 3 notes, maybe 4 notes. And it's really effective. It's cutting through the band. It's covering a certain amount of sonic space that is not necessarily being covered by either the bass or the piano, and to some extent the horns, or as the rest of the instruments. So that, we're starting to really hear that kind of come to the fore here, or come to fruition, at least on the Benny records we've heard so far.
Hal, could we talk a little bit about Sammy Weiss? Again, we talked about Harry Goodman and George Van Epps, but if we clearly this was happening while someone was keeping time, and keeping some kind of excellent time in such a subtle way. Could you talk about anything on what you heard on this recording?
Yeah, it also sounded to me like not only Harry Goodman was to the fore as far as the balance, but so was George Van Epps, playing that really nice even time, as Nick said. And Sammy Weiss was doing the same thing with brushes, just playing very even, unaccented 4/4 on the brushes. And the two of them together just really locked in, made a really beautiful sound, while Harry Goodman's playing in 2-beat. And he's got that nice pulse of 4/4 on the guitar and the drums. Paul Thornhill didn't have much to play on piano on that particular arrangement, but there's still a lot going on in the rhythm section. And the drums are very subtle, but they did exactly what needed to be done on that arrangement.
Talking about the band in general, we all noticed, that there was a flute there. And it's kind of interesting because Toots Mondello, which I found out in this long interview I did with him years later, he told the story about how he was fooling around on the flute, and in 1939, although he's not in the band here, as far as we know, and again, I'm not sure these personnel things are somewhat some guesswork. He came in the band slightly later, I believe, around the time of the Let's Dance broadcasts. But they list Jaime Schertzer and Ben Cantor. But someone's playing a flute, and it's good flute. The short version of the Toots Mondello story is that in 1939 he came into the band, he was fooling around with the flute. Benny said, why don't you bring it out and play it? And he said, well, I really don't have much chops yet. Well, so they started doing the bolero, and they had this introduction to the bolero with the tom-toms or something, and then they would go into the Fletcher Henderson arrangement. I think you can hear part of it on a Camel Caravan broadcast. And he said, he was really humiliated playing the flute because he knew he wasn't good, but Benny insisted on it. So according to him, on a broadcast, he went up, he played the introduction on the flute, and then he did a 1939 version of a mic drop. He went like this, left the flute in the air, and walked away. The flute crashed down, and that's how he got Benny to stop featuring on the flute. But this is kind of interesting because, when it comes to the instrument listings, when you look at pictures of the band at the Congress Hotel, for sure, there's 2 baritone saxes. And, both altos would double on baritone. Same with the Basie band. They very rarely listed. Earl Warren played the baritone. So I think sometimes we just have to add more personnel things. I mean, Benny talks in his book about how he played the oboe. He liked to do features with Ben Pollock on hot oboe. So, all kinds of stuff. So we noticed that the beautiful ensemble playing of the band, the intonation. And before we go to the second track, there's 4 titles, 3 out of the 4 feature Tony Sacco. And Nick, I believe you had some information to share about him, at least just some basic background.
Yeah, he was a hotel singer. He worked with at least a couple bands that were specifically hotel featured bands. So he's kind of right at home in this material. He's kind of the perfect singer for this material, at least his first side. He also was a guitar player. Although interestingly, the only photo I've seen of him comes from an Epiphone guitar catalog, and he's playing a tenor guitar. So it's without more evidence, it's hard to tell whether it was kind of just an accompanying instrument, whether it was kind of a gimmicky type thing. Some of the discographies have listed Sacco as the guitar player on this session. I am very confident it's George and not Tony. But it's just kind of interesting to see this strange figure that frankly doesn't really sound like anyone else, right? I mean, he doesn't sound like Columbo or Bing, or he's kind of his own man at this point in time. I also think it's interesting that they pulled a hotel singer onto this gig or onto this recording date for this material that's very in that vein of some of those big hotel bands of the early 30s.
Yeah. And also, there are probably most vocals from 1934. I'm not sure how well they translate in 2020. You have to make some allowance for the style or allowance for the whatever. His stuff really works well. I mean, I hear it's unaffected, it's in tune, it doesn't have any of the stylistic affectations of the era. In other words, Harlan Lattimore and Columbo to some degree, people were doing their versions of Crosby, or they had their own styles. Some were out and out Crosby imitators, and some were doing other things. But he sounds really fresh and easy and light, I find.
I agree. And he doesn't always sound that way. I've heard some of his other recordings with other bands around this time, and he sounds a little more relaxed on this. Maybe because it's a bit more of an anonymous session. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it also could have been Benny, and the fact that this was a band full of, this was not your run-of-the-mill record date. I mean, everybody on this record date was a great musician. I'm also thinking about Anne Graham, who I guess we remarked upon how great she sounds on that first Columbia session of August 16th, 1934, and how jazzy it is. And I know that Benny, always wanted, that's why he loved Helen Ward, maybe why he wasn't so crazy about Helen Forrest, who's great in another way. Mm-hmm. But, people who sang with a jazz rhythm. So that's kind of interesting. Let's go to the next track. Let's go to Stars Fell on Alabama from the same session.
lived our little drama. We kissed in a field of wine, and stars fell on Alabama last night. I can't forget the glamour. Your eyes held a tender light, and stars fell on Alabama last night. I never planned in my imagination a situation so heavenly, a fairyland where no one else could enter, and in the center, just you and me, dear. My heart beat like a hammer, my arms wound around you tight, and stars fell on Alabama last night.
Wonderful playing from the band there, and a jazz feel, especially when Benny plays. But even behind the vocal, it's kind of insinuating a jazz feel. And you know, for folks who are coming to these recordings without having listened to a lot of 1933, 1934 hotel dance band records, you know, I can understand how, lacking that context, it would sound certainly not a jazz record, and maybe of less interest and kind of commercial, whatever that means. But if you were to listen to a day's worth of the typical dance band records of 1934 and then hear this, you'd think you were listening to John Coltrane's band or something. I mean, and I mean it, in the context of that time. That's an intelligent, swinging, exquisitely musical rhythm section that is, you know, head and shoulders above what you got on most records of that kind of material. Take it away, boys.
The first thing that struck me about this recording, again, you know, with Harry Goodman in the section, and just kind of how interestingly he's playing this time around. I mean, he's shifting back and forth between time feels, doing so really smoothly. And again, you know, like you talked about, when Benny takes his bars, it's just really starts driving the band. You know, co-driving the band. I mean, Van Epps is right there with him, without a doubt. But it's, yeah, I mean, again, I said I'm really happy that Harry Goodman's here, and it's definitely the case. It's like he's clearly something that's elevating the rhythm section up a little bit.
And he's switching back and forth between 2-beat and 4-beat. There's a few passages where he goes into 4, then right back to 2, and it never stops swinging.
Yep.
It just got that nice pulse all the way through. And I think Van Epps is the section leader on that particular recording again. He's the most prominent rhythm instrument besides the bass. The drums are there. He comes in strong behind Benny. He starts playing a little louder on brushes, playing 4-beat. But what a wonderful feel, that whole thing. In 2-beat mainly, a few passages of 4, but there are very few dance bands that had a nice light swing like that from that era.
Plus, you know, I think it's worth noting that in a sense, they play a 2 with a vibration of 4, and they play a 4 with a vibration of 2. If that makes any sense. And I think that's part of it, that that the two half, that the two quarter notes or the two half notes or whatever they're playing when they're playing in two are still vibrating in a rhythm, and that the four, is also obviously vibrating, but they both vibrate the same way, as opposed to, I think, especially in latter-day jazz, and by latter-day I mean after 1940, two became almost, with very few exceptions, two became almost a dead thing, where people really were not thinking about forward momentum for the most part. Nick, I'm not sure that you agree.
No, I agree with that. I think, and this is coming from someone that loves swing era jazz and beyond. I think swing, as it kind of coalesces to its peak in 1939 or so, it kind of drives that two feel out of the music to some extent, right? So that by, like you said, by the early 40s, it's pretty much gone, or it becomes evocative of something else. It becomes evocative of kind of an old hat type feel. So I definitely agree with that. I think I was while you were talking, I was thinking about the mechanics of how do you play a swinging two feel, right? And how does one, shift between, like you were saying, playing in two with retaining some four feel, and playing in four retaining some two feel. It's like, what are those micro changes you have to do? And it's frankly, it's hard. I mean, it's, for someone like Van Epps, it's seemingly very simple because he does it with a lot of ease. And it's just little shifts of where he's putting the emphasis. And it's also, it's big ears. Harry and George are like really listening to what the other one's doing, so that they're reacting. I mean, this may sound obvious, but they're reacting in real time to what the other person's playing from, within the bar. And there's a bounce, there's something going on there that's so crucial to like a good rhythm feel for jazz, in my estimation, of that bounce, and it's bouncing back and forth. And you can hear it throughout the entire record, most explicitly when Benny's soloing maybe, but it's there for sure.
Hal?
I don't have anything to add to that. He said it all.
Okay.
And I love that bounce.
I'll try and add something to it, which is that when I was talking about the two with the feeling of four, and four with the feeling of two, and all that in other words, the rhythm section really has one conception of driving the music forward. Mm-hmm. And whether they're in two or whether they're in four, that doesn't change.
Yeah.
So it's like they're in a car that's going, in a certain speed with a certain bounce, and sometimes they shift like this. But it doesn't change the fact that it's this thing that has a forward momentum. And I guess we're just saying that, as it evolved in later years, if you would say to a jazz rhythm section, go to two, most times that gravitational pull of the forward momentum would kind of disappear sometimes, but
well, not
that's
if they have the right people. Like Clyde Newcomb on the Eddie Condon 1939 Decca plays in two beat through that whole session, but he's playing with Joe Sullivan and Dave Tuck and Condon. So the two, you're not focused on the bass playing in two so much as what's going on around it. Yeah. And the Bob Crosby band, Leduc and Haggard would switch back and forth between two and four. The Kid Ory band, Minor Hall and Ed Garland went back and forth all the time. One would play four and the other would play two. Always a forward momentum in all those bands, no matter who was playing what.
For the folks who are listening to this and or watching it, one of the great things about how these things are presented is you can pause us right here. No, just kidding. But you can pause us right there and go listen to some of these records. Or maybe we'll even create a playlist, because I know you guys are mentioning things. I definitely, when we're done, I want to go listen to them and check them out. Let's go to the next tune. Again, this is September 11th, 1934. Just a reminder, this is the Benny Goodman Band. They had played at the Music Hall And they got a commercial record date. It wasn't even issued under Benny's name. It was issued under two pseudonyms, Vincent Rose and his orchestra and the Modernists on Mellotone Records and Perfect Records and some other subsidiaries. And they're not playing the kind of music that, was going to bring Benny to fame. They were playing kind of standard fare, but with first-rate players, first-rate arrangements, and a really, really good singer. And it's our opinion that there's as much musical gold to be mined out of these records as there are from the hot jazz big band record dates, and they've suffered from neglect in many ways. Luckily, we have excellent transfers. I'm taking these from a CD record set that I believe came out in England. I'll find the name of the label, Benny Goodman, 1931 to 35,
Timeless.
and on Timeless. Yeah, and they're really, really good. For the most part, I'm using those. Once in a while, we go to a blue-labeled Columbia transfer I got from Dave Weiner, I believe it was. But for the most part, that's the source material. All right, let's go to the third tune. This is Ellington's Solitude, which Ellington had recorded earlier that year. Just for starters, that idiosyncratic Claude Thornhill piano solo, in the context of 1934 recording dates playing that kind of material, that's about it's almost like, almost as unusual as Jimmy Rolls, just like a really, odd way to come in there with the, big space and the low notes and the right-hand notes. By the way, since we are all fellow good maniacs, if that's the right way to say it, there is footage from a 1955, 56, I believe it was 55 session that Benny did for Columbia with Claude Thornhill on piano. Buck Clayton, Irby Green, I think Aaron Bell, and I'm blanking on the others. But little snippets of it were used in that TV documentary, Adventures in the Kingdom of Swing, or something like that, that came out, done by my friend Orrin Jacoby. And just before this current crisis hit, we'd come to an agreement with a big Goodman collector who had agreed to underwrite transferring all the film footage taken that day so that we could all share it. All you see in that documentary is a minute or so, but it's fascinating, especially to see Claude Thornhill, who is not, who's on no jazz record dates after he gets his own big band, or very few, and he's there like with he almost looks like, his version of Willie the Lion Smith. I think he has a hat on and a cigarette dangling from his lip, and he's kind of got this kind of like a look, just kind of like a distracted look, kind of like that. And what a fascinating pianist he was. I mean, there's a wonderful Thelonious Monk interview, early Monk interview, like 1947 or 46 or something. And they say, who do you listen to on the piano? And one of the couple of people he mentions, he says, well, outside of Claude Thornhill, no one's really doing anything new. But anyway, as they say, I digress. But something else about that, interesting from a harmonic standpoint, is how in the second chord change, they use a dominant chord. Da 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 da. Forget singing, but he sings they play a dominant chord there, whereas the standard harmony would be a minor seventh chord, which they only use in one A section in the whole piece. I believe the way that it originally went was they go to the dominant chord in the last eight, where it makes a big change. Real, oh wow. A 5 of 5, but that's harmonic analysis. I don't know how interesting that is to anyone but us. But
and that Loren, that might be in the first Duke recording. I got to go back and listen to that, because I think at this point in time there had been one Duke recording of Solitude.
That's right. Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, and I have to compare the two. I should have done my homework, but. Along the same lines, it's kind of interesting. I'm pretty sure this is the first non-Duke recording of Solitude. I'm sure there's a discographer out there that can fact check me, but I think it's kind of interesting that they're doing a Duke tune that was so recently recorded, because Benny didn't do too many of them, unless I'm mistaken, and also that they're kind of so early in on this. I think Irving Mills published a stock that year that may have been arranged by Will Hudson. Does that ring any bells with either one of you?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised if somehow Mills Publishing or Irving Mills is behind this whole record date, all four tunes.
Right. So that would explain a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
It's great to hear. They certainly they feel very comfortable on the material. They perform admirably. We hear that two feel that we've been talking about. We hear it much more pronounced. A little bit of backbeat, some more emphasis on the 2 and 4 from Van Epps this time. I mean, even though that two feel was present before, he's definitely like, this is the way I'm playing this song, which is a little bit of a change, and just. Again, solid rhythm throughout. I was thinking this time through listening to this record how hard that tempo is. They don't waver. It's nice and solid.
Yeah.
He played a nice little arpeggio on the piano chorus too, a guitar arpeggio, and then went into 4 briefly, where he'd been accenting after the backbeat earlier. I heard him go into 4 just briefly towards the end, and. The drums are 2-beat throughout, just playing a big sweep with brushes on the snare drum on 2 and 4. But what a wonderful feeling with the 2-beat bass, and that if you couldn't dance to that, don't bother trying to dance. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Well,
Nick,
Go ahead,
Please.
Loren.
No.
I was going to say about that arpeggio. Thornhill and Van Epps ended up playing quite a bit together. I don't know how much they played together up until this record date, but they both joined the Noble Band the following year and ended up playing a lot together. And they clearly have a respect for each other in terms of like harmonic space. And I think that's, Loren, to your point of those little figures that Claude's playing throughout. It's very respectful of the harmonic space the guitar is taking up in what George is voicing. And it goes both ways. These are fantastic musicians who are listening in the moment, reacting, playing off one another, but also, respecting the harmonic space, which with the piano and the guitar is always a challenge. It's something that unless you can certainly hear it at its worst, but when you're a guitar player, you're challenged with playing with piano players and vice versa. So it's nice to hear them being respectful, but still making great music.
Yes, and such a different solution than Jess Stacey and Alan Roos, which will be interesting, when we get to that, which is a much fuller, busier. I mean, you can hear Roos when you can hear him just chomp, with that strong chomp of his. And Jess Stacey is pretty much playing solo piano through all the time, but it's not solo piano. It sounds like it, but it's a beautiful accompaniment counterpoint. Mm-hmm. It's something really different. And also, to put Thornhill in the context of, let's say, Basie and Ellington, and, people who really, the fascinating thing is, when you really study Ellington's piano playing with his orchestra, and I think it relates to Thornhill, especially when you listen to the Thornhill big band sides, which is let the band play. And the piano comes in when it has something to say. But so many times the piano comp can become duplicative of the ensemble writing, of the horns, of the register. And so, one time I remember I just figured I would listen to a bunch of Ellington records and actually chart when he played the piano and how much he played, especially once you get into the mid-30s on. He's not playing a lot of the time.
No. Yeah.
And I think Thornhill, with his own big band, is the way. And what I love about the connections that we're making here, and, Nick, what you're talking about with the guitar and the piano, I mean, this is something that players, when we get back to playing regularly and with people, something that guitar players and drummers and bass players deal with every day. So again, that's a big point with this series I want to underline. This is not a trip down nostalgia lane to listen to some old records. These are great musicians playing some very interesting music, and there's a hell of a lot to talk about that's relevant, regardless of what style of music that you play.
Did you hear any Earl Hines in Thornhill's solo?
No.
On the bridge?
Well, no, just in his solo in general. I thought I heard something that spoke to me of Hines.
Yeah, it very well might. Yeah.
Yeah, he played over his solo during his bridge, I think it was.
Yes.
He played something that made me think of Earl Hines. Yeah.
No tremolos, but it was at the upper reach of the piano.
Yeah.
It just struck me as, I wonder if he's thinking about Hines there. I think he might have been thinking about Ellington, too.
Yeah.
A little bit of that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's always, it's true. And, it's so fascinating when we project onto the artist how we hear it, and then sometimes project that that's what they were thinking or hearing. We just don't know. But now you see, but this is what's so interesting about this, because what I certainly hope doesn't happen during our series is that we have unanimity on everything. Thank God, And so now I want to go back and check out and see, maybe there was something reminiscent of Earl Hines, or maybe, who knows, maybe when he was 14 he spent the summer at the same resort with Teddy Weatherford. We'll never know. But anyway, absolutely fascinating. Just a couple of more comments. I want to read the personnel that's given for this because it's missing someone. There are clearly 4 saxophones. And the personnel only has 3 saxophones. But Russ Case, Jerry Neary, and Sam Shapiro. Trumpets, most people know Sammy Shapiro as Sammy Spear, the band leader on on the Jackie Gleason show many years later. Red Ballard and Jack Lacey, and it's funny because they always put Red Ballard. Actually, I'm trying to see. Yeah, they always put sometimes Red Ballard's name first in the trombone section listings, and usually this particular discographer, Russ Connor, and many others do tend to put who they think is playing lead first. But we know that Red Ballard never played lead. He always played second trombone. Wonderful trombonist, and part of the. I remember I studied arranging once with an arranging teacher who said, the French horn is the roving outfielder of the orchestra. Because, the French horn can play with the reeds, with the brass, with the woodwinds, he can blend. And someone like Red Ballard or Juan Teasel in Ellington's band sometimes, orchestrally, they blend so well that they can be spotted in many different places in orchestration and don't get the credit that a Harry James gets or a Gene Krupa gets or a whomever, and they are, as we know, but equally responsible for the band's greatness. Someone like Red Ballard. What was that solo he played? Was it Remember or Always? On one of those two tunes, I think it was Always maybe, or some tune where he had a solo. But that indeed was his only solo, as far as I know. They say the reeds are Jaime Schertzer and Ben Cantor, Art Rollini on tenor, but there's another tenor sax in there. And according to contemporaneous reports, Babe Russin was subbing on the gig, and who the hell knows? But they're clearly four saxophones, and I don't for a moment think that Benny at this point would have brought a tenor with him and would be sitting in the section playing and then getting up and playing a clarinet bridge. It just doesn't seem feasible to me from a professional standpoint. He had his hands full trying to conduct the band and lead the band. Claude Thornhill, George Van Epps, Harry Goodman, and Sammy Weiss. So that's the personnel. Let's go to the next track, and this is the last one, and it's I'm Getting Sentimental Over You. There are two versions. Why don't we hear both back to back? And we get the most Goodman jazz meat here. He has a good at least 24 bars, if not 32 bars. I can't remember how long the solo is. You guys remember from our aborted session? No? Okay, all right.
No.
Okay. All right, here it is. Here it is. Here they are.
Never thought I'd fall, but now I hear love call. I'm getting sentimental over you. Things you say and do just thrill me through and through. I'm getting sentimental over you. I thought I was happy, I could live without love. Now I must admit love is all I'm thinking of. Won't you please be kind and just make up your mind that you'll be sweet and gentle. Be gentle with me because I'm sentimental over you. Never thought I'd fall, but now I hear love call. I'm getting sentimental over you. Things you say and do just thrill me through and through. I'm getting sentimental over you. I thought I was happy, I could live without love. Now I must admit love is all I'm thinking of. Won't you please be kind and just make up your mind that you'll be sweet and gentle, be gentle with me, because I'm sentimental over you.
On the first take, I think there weren't any drums on the first chorus. I think he was just playing the vibraphone. And notice on the second take, there's no vibraphone on the first chorus. He's playing drums. I didn't notice that when I listened to it before. I just now heard it. Maybe Benny said need a little more rhythm. Forget the vibraphone, just play drums. He didn't hit it until the very end. The magic last note that Nick pointed out.
I disagree, Hal. I'm in the spirit of what Loren suggested. I'm going to disagree with you. I did hear.
Please don't. Now I'm going to call Judge Judy in here.
I listened really closely to the second version we heard because I heard the same kind of weird idiosyncrasies that you were hearing. You know, rhythm not here, not there. I think there's vibes on the bridge of the A section on the second version. I think I got to go back and listen to it. It's buried. He hits like a single note or two at the very end of the.
I think you said bridge of the A section.
I'm sorry, the bridge of the instrumental plan. So, you know, they play the form through instrumentally, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And on the bridge. In both versions, but he plays a couple vibe notes at the very end of that bridge. I think.
Okay, maybe it sounds to me like there's no drums on the first take. That's what I heard. I noticed on the second take, when there are drums, Thornhill plays a little chime at the end of the chorus. Where I think that was vibraphone the first time through. I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we gotta go. We gotta listen again.
Okay.
Quick, pause this. We'll all listen again.
Okay. Can we all make our pause face? Okay. All right. Okay. So a couple of comments. First of all, Tony Sacco. That melody, starts with a wide range of intervals. And then do dee 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 dee. I mean that's not easy to sing. I mean it's easy to go do dee do 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 do, but to actually sing it, with words, it's not easy. And it's something that a lot of even name singers, they would kind of fluff it, or it wouldn't be quite, But this guy's like a chime, man. He hits all those intervals beautifully.
Yeah.
And also just also to talk about, and I'd love to hear your guys' take on this, about is, it seems like Goodman is really kind of fully formed like by 1930 and 31. I mean, it's all there. And there are moments on this solo and he plays a chorus on both. I said I wasn't sure before. He plays 32 bars where, it's hard to describe, but it's like he's so full of music that something comes through, even on a recording like this, so many years ago, that I get the feeling of what it might have felt like when he played that note. He's like overflowing with music. He just imbues it with such beauty, and they really, capture his tone well here, And, I'm wondering, if we can branch off for a moment, because you've both listened to a lot of early Goodman. Your thoughts about the early Goodman, your thoughts about how he sounds at this time, and just general reflections on the pre-famous Benny Goodman.
Gosh, I think he was fully formed that first record he made with Ben Pollock. I mean,
Waiting for Katie and all that.
Change. Deed I Do is the first one.
Right.
That's amazing. When you think about early recordings by Armstrong or Bix, just Stacy, and how you can hear what's to come, but with Goodman, it's there. It's all there on that solo. Not to say that he didn't get stale or repeat himself or ever play anything boring, but I think he was fully formed as soon as he made that record. It's really amazing. And he just got better and better after that.
Yeah.
I think in spite of that, though, I do think there's a little bit of a turning point, and I'm trying not to project too much in this case, but I think there's like an extra level of confidence he might be exuding around this time. I mean, yeah, he's leading his own record dates. He's, leading bands, larger ensembles on gigs, but he also seems to be working a bit more in terms of, just by sheer discography numbers, unless I'm mistaken. So maybe that's part of it too, is just hearing like, a nice flow of ideas. He's kind of, we're getting more of an insight to just kind of his playing on a more regular basis by this point in time in his career, perhaps.
Well, it's interesting because, record dates were not all of his career, of course. I mean, they were just part of it. He was doing gigs every night, I assume, and, bands and all different kinds of things. But you made me think about something which hasn't occurred to me before, which is that, okay, so he's in Ben Pollock's band, okay. Then he's doing, with Ben Pollock, they're doing Broadway shows. So the range of musical experience is broadening a little bit. It's not just Ben Pollock's great dance band, but now you're in a show and, there's different kinds of stuff. We know that he was doubling, he was playing the trumpet, he was playing all different kinds of instruments, not much trumpet, but he was playing all different kinds of reeds and stuff, okay. But when he gets into the studios in, in 30, when he leaves Pollock, 30, 31, 32, more and more, he's encountering more different kinds of music. Just being that studio guy. I mean, he's playing legit things, he's playing commercial things, he's playing Lord knows what in the context of being a radio studio recording guy in those days. And maybe that also informs it, that he's just bringing all those experiences into what he does. One interesting thing I know is that Mel Powell told me once that when he was with Goodman in the early 40s, he, according to his own lights, really taught Benny about chord changes. And by that, taught him literally what they were. Not that he as you hear here on every record he ever made, he plays every chord known to man and plays them beautifully. My analogy is always, I don't care if the chef can't name every spice in the rack. If he cooks a great meal, who the hell cares? But and you can hear, like on that rehearsal session with Basie, not the rehearsal session, but on the warm up to one of the issued takes on the sextetta for Charlie Christian, on Benny's bugle, I think it is. He goes, okay, and he's trying to tell him what chord to play, and he goes, blah 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 blah, and he goes, no, blah 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 blah, and he misnames the chord. You know what I mean? He goes blah 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 blah. Who the hell cares? But it's interesting that I think it's a great plus with him, and I think it's the same with Lester Young. And sometimes these things are thought of pejoratively. Oh, he was an ear player. Well, if you come up with what Benny Goodman or Lester Young came up with, just among others, why don't we just call it genius and leave it at that?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, Goodman also, I think, every time he played with a really great band, he played greater than that band. The greater the band he worked with, the better he played, and all the way to the end. But by this period, this is an excellent band by any standards, but he's still the best player in it.
I think that's very important. Yeah. And then you hear him, with Teddy Wilson and Roy Eldridge and Billie Holiday and all these people. And not that he ups his game, but yeah, and I think that's really true. And I think that's why he had that big problem with Sid Catlett that we talked about and others. Is that, he really, that was part of his thing, which is, I guess, what made him so great. Getting back to the record, Nick, all those little moments, and I guess they could just be one arpeggio or one quarter note or two quarter notes. But as I listened to it closely, and I have to say, listening with you guys, and I hope it's the same for you too, doing this kind of mutual listening, you tend to like what's Nick hearing, what's Hal hearing, and those little magical moments that Van Epps throws in that just might be one strum.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hear?
Yeah.
I mean, how many different things is he doing in the course of that 3-minute record, or however long it was?
What really struck me about the first take of Sentimental here was just how many kind of chances he was taking, how much he was varying his playing. This is kind of the most, it's the riskiest playing I think we've heard from Van Epps yet in these two sessions. And to your point, he is shifting rhythmic accents, which is, another one of those kind of things guitarists would have in their tool bag at this point in time, but something he's employing pretty frequently throughout this record. Playing some straight four, playing some backbeat, playing some really lightly accented 2-beat. Those arpeggios you mentioned that he's not necessarily throwing in at, I was trying to hear the rhythm of things, like, okay, well, maybe he's doing it every bridge, or maybe he's doing it at the end of the A section, but it wasn't. It was just like, okay, well, I'm feeling it now. And the important thing is he's taking all these chances, he's doing all these different things, and the song keeps moving forward. It's not disrupting the rhythm, it's not changing the feel. In an overall sense, it's changing the feel in very subtle ways rhythmically. I think to Hal's point too, the interesting thing to think about is there's no drums, or there's a lack of drums in a few different parts of each of these recordings at the very least, which means, the rhythm, the responsibility for the rhythms following heavier on Harry Goodman's shoulders, Claude Thornhill's shoulders to some extent, but also Van Epps. It's kind of interesting how risky he's playing throughout, especially when the drums aren't there. It's kind of amazing, and it's great to hear. It's just, again, to show you that there's more to it than just playing 2, playing 4, playing arpeggio or not. You can mix it up over the course of the tune, which is great.
Question: why the adjective risky? Because that's something that maybe as non-guitarists it's hard to understand. What's risky about it?
Well, I think, you have to think about the primary responsibility of the guitar player in a dance band, and that's to be a timekeeper. The guitar is there at this point in time, and frankly, until the point in time the guitar leaves jazz orchestras in the 40s, it's really there to be a timekeeper. That's the primary responsibility. So if you're doing things that jeopardize the reason you're sitting in the chair, you're threatening to throw off the band, you're threatening to throw off your section mates, and on a record date you're threatening to ruin a take, which, in 1934 no one wanted to be the person to ruin a take. So there's something that kind of struck me. I think George may have felt a little more, and I'm sticking my neck out a little bit here, but I think he may have felt a little bit more comfortable in this particular tune. If I'm not mistaken, he's on one of the Dorsey Brothers recordings of Sentimental, which may have been not too long before this version. So he may have been a little more familiar with the tune. I got to look that up. I got to figure out a way to multitask. But that
I can do it. Go ahead.
It definitely was maybe a little bit more well known of a tune in general. So perhaps, perhaps he felt, there you go. Fact check time. And it's also the end of the session, right? So it's the last tune they're cutting on the session. They knew they weren't going to cut any more tunes in those days. Because 4 was the standard number of tunes you'd cut on a date.
Right.
So, maybe George was ready to go home.
Now, interestingly enough, just a month before this record date, the Dorsey Brothers Band did record Getting Sentimental Over You. Interestingly enough, it's possible that his brother was the pianist on that record date, but the guitarist was Rock Hillman.
Okay. Oh, wow.
But something Van Epps was in your head. You knew there was a Van Epps connection there.
Is that the date with Stop, Look, and Listen? Did you just...
That is... Yes, it is.
Okay. So George wrote Stop, Look, and Listen with his brother, Robert, who was on the date. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Can you talk for a moment about, because I know this is something that you make a great study of, the kind of guitar he was playing.
Sure.
Yeah, for folks like I'm curious.
Warning: guitar geekery ahead. Loren, you should never ask a guitar player to talk about guitars. You instant regret.
Next I'm going to ask Hal about what kind of sticks Stan King, Sammy Weiss was playing.
Excellent.
Okay.
Fair enough. So George was playing an archtop guitar. The main difference between guitars, an archtop being a guitar with a curved hand carved top with kind of F holes like you see in a upright bass or a violin. A very different sound from a more traditional guitar, which is a flat top guitar with a circular cutout, or even like a half moon cutout like Django Reinhardt played. Different type of construction, used in different types of musics, and different sounds produced. So by 1934, arch tops were standard, the standard issue as far as what dance band guitar players used. Definitely what most jazz guitar players use at this point in time. George was an early customer of a New York company called Epiphone, who were Gibson's main competitors. And George had, by all accounts, a magnificent sounding instrument that he purchased very early on, probably in 1932, from Epiphone. So he had a wonderful sounding instrument that he loved and had until his death. It was kind of legendary among other guitar players how great it sounded. And most importantly, we know that George loved the sound of it and loved playing it, which, for any instrumentalist, you want an instrument that's not fighting you. So if you like the sound that your instrument is producing, if it plays easily, if it produces the tone that you have in your head or your heart, you're going to play better. So I think, you know, George had had this guitar for a couple of years at this point in time. We know he liked it. And I think that contributes to his kind of overall success as a guitar player.
Was he playing the 7-string at this time?
No. So that was a late 30s development that George pioneered. He probably, I think he said he started messing around with the concept 1938-ish or so. And then he finally went to Epiphone, the company that I mentioned before, at the end of the decade, pitched his idea. The owner at that time jumped on it, and he took delivery of his first 7-string in 1941. So we know that it did not appear on any records before that date. And it's a different concept, but again, without like kind of boring everyone to tears in terms of like 6 versus 7 strings. You know, it changes the harmonic approach to the material, like what notes you're selecting and where on the guitar you're selecting it. And it was really George's major innovation beyond his approach to the music, which, you know, we definitely hear during the 1930s. And I think I mentioned it before, he wrote a method book for guitar players that was rush released at the end of the 1930s that summarizes a lot of his theories and philosophies on guitar playing, and all of which are illustrated on these records to varying degrees. But his second innovation was the 7-string guitar, which came along later. And frankly, that's what most people know George Van Epps for, is the 7-string guitar. And
right.
that the whole world had opened up for many guitar players.
I'm sorry, his risky or willingness to take risk. He probably felt very comfortable trying things in that rhythm section.
Yeah.
Because it worked so well together, even at those slow tempos. I mean, it doesn't budge. Everybody's just playing what they need to play and staying out of each other's way and listening. And that's when you do tend to take risks. That's when I take risks. I'll play brush rolls or something like that. If the rhythm's holding together, everything's solid, just to spice it up just a little bit from what's on the paper. And I noticed also, if I heard it correctly, he played a little Dick McDonough figure behind the vocal. Dun, 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 dun,
yeah.
Type of thing. I thought I heard it on the second take there, but it sounded like he just loosened up the second time through. Maybe that's because the drums got it going a little better on the first chorus without the bells, with more drums and less bells or something like that. But what a nice free-floating, lightly swinging rhythm section. And drums just barely playing anything but a big sweep on 2 and 4 until Benny comes in. Then it goes into 4. And it's got a little extra kick to it. Really, really nice music.
Well, and again, I think we have to give credit, as we did at the start of this session, to Harry Goodman. I mean, it's a big part of the success of the rhythm section. When I say success, I just mean making good music. I'm not talking about commercial success here. It's just Harry's super solid. He's got you can always feel his beat. He's always where he should be. You know, certainly by the end of the session, they would have been comfortable playing for however long they were playing that afternoon or evening. So yeah, kudos to Harry Goodman. And to your McDonough point, Hal, you know, I'm pretty sure at one point in time, Dick McDonough and George Van Epps are roommates. Uh-huh. And they definitely spend a lot of time exchanging ideas. And this is kind of like a peak of that time in terms of, there's a very famous, among guitar players at least, solo version of Honeysuckle Rose that Dick McDonough cut in 1934. It's got Van Epps all over it in terms of some of the harmonic approaches, but you have to think it was a two-way street. I mean, George had massive ears. He respected talent and was would pick up things wherever he heard them. And Dick McDonough was certainly an amazing guitar player in his own right. So I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a little bit of picking up a McDonoughism and inserting it at the proper moment.
I just want to add, that McDonough was Goodman's guitarist of choice.
Yeah.
And in the months preceding this record date, some of the most famous ones, the ones with Billie Holiday and Ethel Waters and others, and many dozens of other dates, Dick McDonough is playing guitar with Benny Goodman, whether they're in Benny's recording band or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's just natural. And just to build on your point about the two-way influence, that sometimes has to be stressed that it's two ways, because one player was older or one player was established first. And we're going to get into this with the next session, because Teddy Wilson is on this next record session. It's the Stars record session. And no discographer has really put his foot down to say who's on guitar, bass, or drums. We're going to listen to it and see what we can figure out. But in doing research about Teddy and Art Tatum, they met early on, and everyone always just assumed that, well, Art Tatum is the god of the piano, and he and Teddy met early on, and obviously Tatum influenced Teddy, and although actually Tatum was a couple of years older. According to people who know, and listening tells us that it was a two-way street, and that sometimes that Teddy was more coherent earlier and had more of a, whereas Tatum in the early days is just kind of like, he's all over the place as the brilliant Art Tatum. Doesn't necessarily tell as coherent a story as he told later, let's put it that way. And so I love your point about Van Epps and McDonough, although McDonough was king of the studios and king of the work, and Van Epps is coming up. Sure, there could have been two ways, and the same with drums too, right? With many drummers who learned from younger drummers. And
I want to address something. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay, sorry. Address something you mentioned last week, or last time we talked, was the drums stirring the soup with the brushes. And when did that start? You can hear a little bit of that on the second take behind Benny. I just noticed it this time listening. I hadn't noticed it the first time. And it's not like Joe Jones or Denzel Best or someone like that, but it's a very early example of playing something besides straight time on the brushes.
Can you show us a hand motion, just a basic hand motion? Okay.
What I hear is right beat, da 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 da.
Yeah.
Only behind Benny on that second take. I hadn't noticed it before.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful session on the second session of the Benny Goodman Orchestra, September 11th, 1934. Again, did not come out under Goodman's name, but we've said all that before. So I want to thank you two for a wonderful, wonderful... Man, we spent a lot of time on these 5 titles, on these 5 performances. And something tells me that we could keep going, Right, okay. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Loren.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
Thanks, Al.
Oh, okay, thanks. All right. So this is session 3 in our ongoing series of the early Goodman Orchestra, which is really started by paying a lot of attention to George Van Epps and the rhythm section. I confessed to my 2 friends here before we even taped the first episode, and I don't think this made it into the first episode, that, I had a prejudice. And I had a prejudice against Sammy Weiss, which I might be the only person in the United States to ever say that sentence. But, to me, and anyway, it just goes to show he wasn't Gene Krupa, which, first of all, is a very unfair thing to say. And he wasn't Ray McKinley. Well, so what? He was Sammy Weiss. Then I saw him in later years on an episode of the Jack Benny Show, and he was playing in a way that seemed like he would have fit perfectly for Sophie Tucker or in vaudeville or something like that, which was the gig. The gig was not to sit there and play forward marching jazz time, it was to do, whatever they would want. So I didn't appreciate him. And then in the course of coming to do this show, started listening, saying, man, this guy's really good and a great professional. He wouldn't have been in the band if he wasn't. And so that was part of the emphasis. The other emphasis was, I know that Hal Smith, who I've already turned to for help over the last couple of years since we've become Facebook friends, no one knows more about early jazz drumming, not just on the technical level and the equipment level, but on the performing level. We've talked about things of the most arcane, fascinating detail about the evolution of jazz drums up through the late 30s. And Nick, who I've also gotten to know, has made a life study out of many niches in jazz history, but specifically this niche, right? Because your work recently on that wonderful Nat Cole box set, Oscar Moore and all that, something is a big interest of yours. But specifically this 30s-ish stuff, is something. So who better to share thoughts with and to learn from the three of us here as kind of our trio, not the Nairobi trio necessarily, but but a lot of fun. Now we go to a record date that is fascinating, and I will read from the Bible, and that is Russ Conner on Benny Goodman. And for those who are, I assume that anyone who's gotten this deep into this series would know all about D. Russ Conner and his books. But in case you don't, simply put, D. Russ Conner was a banker, eventually worked at the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia, and he was a Goodman fan from the 1930s. He befriended Gene Krupa and Dave Tuff, and he was around the band as an educated fan. And then in 1958, he published a book called B.G. Off the Record, which was a biodiscography, which sounds almost like a medical term. But what a biodiscography was a combination of a biography and a discography. So it listed the records and it integrated the story of every record that Goodman ever made into his life story, with opinions and things like that. But there it is. There it is. And so he did this. And for many fans of early jazz, and specifically Goodman, it became like a Bible because it was so well written, the text was well written, and the discography was so well done that you could sink into it and just study it like I started doing when I was young, and I assume that you guys did too. So that's D. Russ Conner. He then later wrote B.G. on the Record, which Arlington House printed, I think, in 1968 or 1969. Then there was a bootleg version that came out called Benny Goodman. I forget the subtitle. I have a lot of interesting stories to share at some time about that, but it was a bootlegged copy of his book. He was going to do it with a kind of a shyster, there's a word for you, publisher, and it didn't work out. Then eventually it came out, I believe, through the Institute of Jazz Studies, Scarecrow Press, as Benny Goodman listened to his legacy. And that's the one that's the version of the Talmud, Old Testament, New Testament I'm going to read from here, Quran and everything else. And then he put out a second volume called Benny Goodman Wrapping It Up. And then his designated successor, Dave Jessup, has come out with a third volume of the continuing Goodman series. So anyway, that's the discography angle. So getting back to what Russ wrote about this, faced with the end of the music hall engagement, that's the music hall, the Billy Rose Music Hall, Benny needed a new venture to bolster his morale. He found it in a proposed jazz tour of Europe as leader of a group of all-stars. Together with John Hammond, Benny began to put together a dream band. And let's remember, this is late 1934. Most of the people whose names we're going to mention were not only household names, but were pretty much unknown outside of the New York jazz world. A dream band that included Doc Cheatham, Henry Red Allen, Bill Coleman, and Charlie Teagarden trumpets, Jack Teagarden, J.C. Higginbotham, and Will Bradley on trombones. I think Will Bradley was still Wilbur Switchenberg at that point. Benny Carter and Edgar Sampson, alto saxes, Chu Berry on tenor. It says here Big T. Teagarden wanted his buddy Bud Freeman in the band. Teddy Wilson, piano, Lawrence Lucy, guitar, Hank Whalen, bass, Gene Krupa, drums, Red Norvo, marimba, and Bessie Smith on vocals. And if you read the contemporary press reports, I mean, I remember when I read this, and I said, well, you know, they probably talked about it a little bit, and there might have been an article. No, there was a lot of press in the English trade journals and in the American trade journals about this. It was a real thing, and it got held up, as many things did, by the attitude of the English musicians' unions, which forbade or forbade or whatever the word is, a lot of this stuff. Anyway, now let's get to the music. It never happened, as we said, but there was a record session done in the midst of these discussions in October 1934, when the big band, the Goodman Big Band gig ended on October 17th, 1934. And this is October 16th, 1934. These two tracks never came out. The singer is Tony Sacco. The tune is Stars, that Ellington also recorded, by the way. And it's guesswork as to who's on this date. Now, from our perspective, I would like to we'll focus on the horns too. There seems to be some unanimity that we hear Teddy Wilson, Doc Cheatham. But anyway, we'll talk about all those things. Specifically, what can we garner from the guitar and the drums on top of everything else? So let's go to the mystery record date. I didn't mean to be preemptive there. Did someone want to add any thoughts about that stuff, you know, that we were talking about, or no?
No, let's hear the tunes.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Little diamonds in the sky, you kiss the clouds as they roll by, while all the world's at rest. Stars, you stay awake the whole night through, to light each lover's rendezvous, when birds have gone to nest. Somewhere in your blanket of white and blue you hide all day. But as soon as twilight bids night adieu, you guide my way, oh stars. You fill the mystic night with charm, while I am dreaming in the arms of one I love the best.
I don't think it's necessarily Teddy Wilson or Jack Teagarden.
I think that's Teddy Wilson. does sound like Teddy. It doesn't sound like Jack Teagarden so much. It sounded like Charlie Teagarden on trumpet to me. I'd say that's probably Hank Wayland on bass. It sounded like an aluminum bass from the previous session. Also sounded like he was bowing it through most of that. That's just what I heard through the speakers here, but it wasn't pizzicato. It had either he was making really letting the strings ring, or he was bowing. The drumming could barely hear except for the cymbal crash. That might have been Sammy Weiss again. It didn't sound like Krupa. I couldn't hear the guitar at all. I have no idea who that might be. But there's 2 takes of this, right?
Oh yeah, we're going to hear the second take, but I wanted to talk in between. Nick?
I think it could be George. I didn't feel like rhythmically it was a huge departure from the last session. I thought there was enough, and frankly, Hal, until you said it was an aluminum bass, I was kind of thinking like some of the patterns reminded me of what Harry Goodman had been playing on the last session, in terms of the broken up patterns, and the fact that the guitar and the bass played so well together. It could be Van Epps. There was a couple things that made me think like, okay, yeah, it's George. More than anything, it was right there, it was in the pocket, and it wasn't someone like, I definitely don't think it was Lawrence Lucy, for example, who, even if he was being vetted for the band, like had a very distinctive style on those 34 Fletcher Henderson records. I think I would have recognized Lucy's playing. But it was a little hard to hear the guitar, so I'm still a fence sitter.
Is it fair to ask you, like I asked Hal in another episode of this thing, and I might have to do it myself at some point, to demonstrate with your hands? I actually like that. What does it look like, the kind of playing you're talking about that Van Epps would do, and just what does it look like from what Lawrence Lucy would do? How can we see it? Because I assume that you could actually see a rhythmic motion or something.
Yeah. Well, I may have talked about this before, and pardon me if I did. Lawrence Lucy had a really strong conception about rhythm guitar, and due to an interview that we have that Phil Schaap conducted with him before Lawrence Lucy died, he talked about it. And so Lucy really put an emphasis on backbeat. And
what does that look like?
I guess I could grab a guitar, right? Just happen to have one. So, is that okay?
Yeah.
So, here's straight time, right? You see my hand, it's just going straight down, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to play backbeat, you tend to start playing in almost like a figure 8 motion, so that the 2 and 4 is a little bit closer to the bridge of the guitar. The sound produced gets brighter the closer you go that way on the guitar. You can get more of a thwack, more of a crack, kind of more like a cymbal snap. So, depending on how much you want to emphasize it, it's Does that make sense?
Hell yeah, sure, of course.
Okay.
And after no, but yeah, sure.
Helpful? Was that helpful? Is it more?
No, it was very helpful. No, of course it was, because again, not playing the guitar. I mean, I've seen these things many times over the years. I don't know why, frankly, or exactly what it meant, and so that's fine. But there was enough information on that record for you actually to hear a guitar and start to divine something. Now, about Teddy Wilson, I'm in the middle. I always thought it was, based on the personnel listing, which was never confirmed by Teddy, but that doesn't make a difference. In the beginning of it, I did hear a few things. I mean, there's a lot of octave-ish things that could have been almost, Joe Sullivan or a pianist like that. It's not Joe Sullivan. But there were also a few little left-hand things that, to me, are a little anomalous when you listen to the 34 Wilson solos. However, This is not a solo session. It's a big band record date, and who the hell knows? I'll be in the middle. I mean, I'll just say, like, I don't think it's him, but it could be. And right now we have Hal thinks it very well might be. And we have Nick saying that he heard enough guitar there to say that it's definitely, how about this? It's definitely not George Van Epps. That makes any sense whatsoever. And the trumpet, Hal heard some Charlie Teagarden, and I have to agree. That kind of singing tone, not rhythmically incisive necessarily, but kind of the way that Charlie Teagarden played. It certainly could be him, but now we know as professional musicians, logically speaking, Goodman's band is still working at the music hall. Mm. It stands to reason that for a nondescript record date like this, I mean, there were only 2 tunes done, nothing else has ever shown up, nothing was ever issued, that if it was that great band that they were putting together, that they would have recorded a jazz tune, or I mean, why get an interracial band of all geniuses together, a real special event, and record a background that never came out, as opposed to just asking the guys in your band, hey, there's a record session. I don't know the answer,
but they worked with Teddy before that. I guess it's before this, that session where they did As Long As I Live. It's got Ray McKinley.
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure.
Was that before this session?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And Benny and Teddy had already had the famous, Mildred Bailey jam session with Carl Bellinger, so...
but yeah. I'm thinking he could have called on Charlie. What if one of these other trumpet players from the music hall wasn't available? And he worked with Charlie for a lot, and he's a dependable guy, come in and just play whatever's there. Maybe this is all the guys he could get. He couldn't get Doc Cheatham and Red Allen and all those people.
Well, go ahead.
Hal, you've got a really good point. I reread the Goodman interview that is in Lost Chords, the Sue Holter book, and Benny talks a little bit about the music hall gig, and he talked about how he had a lot of subs on that gig, and it was one of the things that actually made him a little nervous. Was he kind of never knew who was going to turn up. I'm paraphrasing what he said. So I think, Hal, you bring up a really good point that, it very well could have been the music hall band as its core, and he very well could have had to be dealing with subs because he just wasn't commanding the attention of the musicians that he later would. Or
it's true. No, it's true. And also, the fact that they jammed the last date would mean that he had in mind that he wanted jazz guys, really, his usual first call great jazz guys, and Charlie Teagarden is on those late dates in '33, along with Shirley Clay and a few others. Also, I don't think Russ Case, Jerry Neary, or Sammy Shapiro, or whoever the hell was subbing at the music hall, they were not, first-rate jazz players that you would call for a small group record date. They were great musicians, but not that necessarily. So yeah, sure. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's definitely not Red Allen, and yeah. Well, let's listen to the second take.
Yeah.
No, go.
I just keep going back to the fact that the rhythm section to me sounds really similar to the last session. There's just, especially in the guitar, there's not a lot of syncopation. The bass is covering similar ground. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking they're drawing from the same well.
Okay, let's listen to the second take, and we'll see how it's how the sound. I don't remember, whether it's noticeably better or something like that. But so, according to Russ here, we'll hear a trumpet melody statement at the beginning, so that will help a little bit, as opposed to Benny. So here we go.
little diamond in the sky. You kiss the clouds as they roll by, while all the world's at rest. Star, you stay awake the long night through, to light each lover's rendezvous. When birds have gone to rest, somewhere in your blanket of white and blue you hide all day. But as soon as twilight bids night adieu, you guide my way, oh star. You fill the mystic night with charm, while I am dreaming in the arms of one I love the best.
Well, okay. I think Teddy Wilson walked into the studio for the second take and said to Arthur, "Shut," but no, it's indubitably and undoubtedly Teddy Wilson. Yeah, Hal. Yeah.
There's a few phrases there that could have been Frank Froba, except they swing more. That's what makes me Teddy Wilson. I heard some things that Froba played with the Rhythm Makers on the 1932 sessions, but he didn't play them as loosely as that pianist did.
And also, I'll just also enter in the touch.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Much lighter.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's Gene on drums. That sounds like Sammy Weiss to me, because he played really nice press rolls.
Yeah.
That sounds like his crash cymbal too, and not like Gene's in that era. I think Gene would have played more stuff, because it was supposed to be, even a ballad like that, it was still supposed to be a jazz band. He would have really laid it down, maybe played with a stick under the choke cymbal on the last 8, like a hi-hat kind of thing. Whereas I think Sammy Weiss would have just stayed with playing time. Different orientation than Gene.
Could it be?
Couldn't hear the guitar very well, though.
Could it be someone like Stan King?
No. Stan had a very distinctive press roll, more than Gene or anyone else. That's what he was known for, was his press roll playing.
Oh.
But I think that was Sammy Weiss, and he did a good job with the music hall band. Why replace it?
Yeah.
At least for a one-off recording session like that.
Yeah. How about the guitar, Nick?
I'm feeling more confident it was George. I'm like 90% now. He plays some arpeggiated figures underneath the trombone solo, or a portion of the trombone solo, I believe, on that take that made me think about him. And of course, George wasn't the only one to play those types of figures. When we talk about these different tools that guitarists at the time had, many guitarists would have been able to do that, but just the way he deployed them when he did and kind of went back to time. It's good time throughout. That again makes me think of George. I think it's a more conservative minded Van Epps if it's George. I think also it's just going back to what we talked about earlier about placement in the studio for these things. I think the bass and the guitar are placed further away from the mic here. Plus, there's a little bit extra surface noise that we're having some hard time navigating, just due to the source of the material. But it's the rhythm feels good throughout, and again, I keep going back to it feels like the previous couple sessions in terms of the rhythm feel. And there was definitely a couple things here that said, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's George.
And where were we on the bass? Or it's hard to say.
I say Hank Wayland, and Nick says it's Harry Goodman.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was listening for the sound qualities, Hal, to see. I think you're right. It doesn't have that nice woody big note sound that we were hearing on that last session from Harry. And my ear's not quite tuned into it enough to say like, yeah, that's definitely an aluminum bass, but it's not a dissimilar player from either one of those. How's that for non-committal?
The authority, I have the authority of Harry Goodman.
I agree.
Lay down the time like Harry did. That was the biggest difference between the two sessions to me, besides the aluminum bass versus the wooden bass, is that Harry had more authority in his playing.
I agree
with this band. Loren, I want to ask you something about this. What do you think about that trumpet on the opening chorus?
Yes.
That sounded like the notes he played sounded like Charlie Teagarden, but not that tone.
Oh, absolutely not. And that little chromatic run that he tended to throw in 3 or 4 times. No, I don't think it's Charlie Teagarden. And if I were a lawyer, I'll make the case for why it might be Doc Cheatham. Why it might be, although I have no idea why. But here's the case I would make. That is a first trumpeter playing. And it's a first trumpeter / a first trumpeter's approach to a written melody. There's no attempt to Armstrong it or to Beiderbecke it or to jazz it in any way, and it's kind of almost staid. And that little perfectly articulated little chromatic thing that the guy whips out 3 or 4 times is the work of a studied player who, and again, talk about projection. Here I am, but here's how I project onto it. Is like, this is a guy who's a first trumpet player who's playing it like a first trumpet player. Even though Benny Goodman is there and Teddy Wilson is there, I'm going to show you the first trumpet version of this melody. Now, I think of Joe Wilder, who could do the same kind of thing much later in life. But he was a great jazz player, but he also had that thing of a kind of sterling technique and you know what I mean, just wanting to show that. I don't know how to describe it. And you probably did too. I was lucky enough to work with Doc and with Joe. I mean, much later in life, but so that's why I think. But on the other hand, the reason I don't think that it's Doc Cheatham is because, well, without going into too much detail, Doc didn't become a soloist until he played in Eddie Haywood's small band in the early 1940s. Before that, Doc Cheatham's stock and trade was Mr. Lead Trumpet. And then, he went from Cab Calloway's band, and then he had a rest. He went to Teddy Wilson's band, and all this kind of stuff. So there's something almost old-fashioned about it, or staid, that it's not how I imagined Doc Cheatham would have sounded in 1933. Boy, that's a lot of talk. But I'll put it this way. It doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard Charlie Teagarden play in those days.
I agree.
Yeah. So I don't know.
It's Charlie Teagarden at the very end. He's got that nice bright tone that he had. That's what I hear. See what I mean? But such a dark tone on the first chorus.
Yeah.
Unlike Charlie Teagarden.
Yes. And and also just the rhythmic tonal fingerprint of someone like Teagarden, is so well known to us that you figure on that first chorus somewhere that Charlie Teagarden light bulb would go on, and it just doesn't. It doesn't. And I don't think he was that much of a chameleon or something, that he could or would do that. Fascinating stuff. The second take seemed to be more jazzy, right? Benny played more of an obligato, and we agree that it is Teddy Wilson. Yeah. And so, just to recap, Nick, you're pretty sure as one can be.
I'm feeling very confident.
Lucy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Loren, because as we were talking, I seem to recall in Shap's interview with Lucy him mentioning this whole episode. So I'm gonna go back to the tapes because I'm now really curious. I don't think it's the one. Lucy had a lot of syncopation in his playing, and really laid on that backbeat. And again, he was a fantastic player, so that's not to say he could do other things and that he didn't do other things. But when you listen to those 1934 Fletcher Henderson records, of which there's quite a few featuring Lucy, it's a pretty distinctive style that I'm not hearing on this record.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. A brief session, just two versions of one tune, but thanks, gents. This is wonderful. I doubt this record date has received this much scrutiny in a long time, except for, and we should mention, and we should send out best get well wishes to Phil Shap, because Phil's has not been feeling well recently, and I've heard he's on the mend, which is wonderful. So if somehow out in the world, Phil, you hear about this, we're all sending you love and best wishes. And thank God, a lot of his radio stuff has been available. A lot of those archival things are now online. I think it may even be philshap.com, I believe is the website, and also on WKCR. But so anyway, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Loren. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Nick.